Three, two, one, and looks like we're rolling. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for joining me again for another episode of Real Live Talk. This is episode number 60. Thank you so much for taking the time to check out this episode, whether you're watching live or listening on one of the podcast platforms later. Hope everybody had an awesome Christmas weekend. And just thank you so much for taking the time to check out this episode. I hope that it blesses you. If it adds any value to your life, if you'd consider subscribing, sharing, or leaving a review. Really appreciate it. I'm really excited today to have as my guest Peter Warren, who is an international leader with Youth for a Mission, also known, Youth with a Mission, also known as YWAM. He and his wife Linda pioneered the YWAM Denver campus and have served there since 1984. He's ministered in over 100 countries and serves currently as the regional facilitator for YWAM in the Western United States and Canada. Peter, thank you so much. It's an honor and a privilege to, first of all, to meet you and to have you here on the show with me. So thanks so much for doing this.
Yes, thank you, Duke. It's good to meet you and appreciate the opportunity to be with you today.
Yeah, and thanks for hanging with me through the technical issues we had at the top of the show here.
No worries.
Yeah. Well, so 100 countries. That's crazy. So how much of your life, and you could answer this pre-COVID, how much of your life is spent traveling?
About a third of the time. I try to
Really?
keep it to that. When our children were little, I was gone for a little over 2 weeks, and my wife said, honey, I can't do this. So we decided even if we had to pay extra, I would only be gone for a week, maybe adding a weekend on either end, but then coming home. So I've kept it to that for many years. So even if I go to Africa or Asia somewhere, Australia, where I'm from, so I normally go to Australia once or twice a year, then I'll just fly back. So yeah, about a third of the time.
Wow. Has that gotten back to normal at all since the lockdowns and since COVID, and now we can travel again? Has it kind of started to normalize, or are you still pretty much grounded a lot more?
Well, no, I'm still traveling, but primarily within the United States. So I've canceled 7 international trips overseas. I haven't traveled out of the US. The last time was to New Zealand in 2019, October 2019. So, and now I'm scheduled to go to Switzerland in May and France, but that's sort of iffy now as well because of the new restrictions. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Have you been to Australia in the past 18 months, let's say?
No, I haven't because as an Australian citizen, so I'm a dual citizen now. For
Okay.
many years, I had a green card, and then after a while, thought, you know what, this is too goofy. I'm just going to become a American citizen as well. I feel like I'm half American anyway, but still hold my Australian citizenship. So I could go back. I would have had to have paid $5,000, which would cover a hotel for a quarantine for 2 weeks and all the food, and then if I tested negative, could get out. So I didn't want to do that. Now I think I would have to quarantine for a week. To be honest with you, it's been somewhat surprising to me how much just the reaction of Australia and New Zealand to this. I never would have thought, because we're pretty low-key,
Yeah.
easygoing.
It's like a
I mean,
party time, right?
Australia's like, someone dragged England through California.
Yeah. That's good.
But it's been, the lockdown has been more severe, definitely, than most of the rest of the world. So I'm just biding my time. I'd like to go back this next year, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, that was the reason for my question. I was wondering if it really is as intense as what I've heard.
Yeah, it is. And, they tried to lock Australia down and New Zealand because they're islands, lock out the rest of the world. hoping that it would blow over and Australia would be spared, New Zealand would be spared, and now it's, because of these new variants that are so contagious, it's got in. So
Mhm.
they still haven't had the death rate that we've had here and in some other places. Uh, Maybe because the population is younger too. Like in Europe, for example, Italy
Mm.
was the worst hit, but it's because their population is a lot older, which probably
Wow.
explains that. Uh, so not as many deaths, but yeah, and Australia's locked down even between the different states.
Wow.
So, you can't travel to Victoria or Western Australia or Queensland. Uh, so, anyway, we'll see how it goes. Hopefully,
Yeah.
this is all coming to an end.
Right? Man, it's been going on a long time. Is it
Yeah, I know.
two weeks to flatten the curve? It's
I
18
remember
months,
that.
20 months ago, something like that. Yeah, man. Well, so you are obviously you're from Australia originally. I know we read in your bio just a moment ago that you and your wife basically founded, pioneered the YWAM campus in Denver. Were you already in the U.S. when you started that project? At what point did you move to the United States?
Yeah, so I uh, came into YWAM in Australia, came over to Southern California to finish some of my studies, met Linda, and that's where we fell in love. Got married, had our first child, our son, Steve, and then felt like the Lord wanted us to. Well, it's interesting how the Lord leads. We thought we were probably going to go somewhere where there was very little mention of the name of Jesus because
Mhm.
we'd been living on the U.S. Center for World Missions. Just to kind of give context, a man by the name of Dr. Ralph and Frida Winter started something in Pasadena called the U.S. Center for World Missions. And there were like 75 different missions organizations, and YWAM was one of those. And during that time, Ralph Winter came out with this statement that kind of rocked the mission world, which was there are in the world unreached people groups. Well, what's that?
Mhm.
No one had ever used that term before. What's an unreached people group? Well, it's a grouping of people, an ethnos. The word for nations in the New
Yeah.
Testament is ethnos, which is a nation defined by language and culture, not by geography and politics,
Geographic,
not a
yeah.
geopolitical, but a ethno-linguistic
Mhm.
nation. And he said there are over 16,000 of these nations that are unreached. So they're within a larger nation like Brazil, but it's a little group up in the Amazon that has their own language and it's undiscovered, or maybe they know about it, but the gospel has not reached them. So we thought the Lord was leading us. When the Lord began to speak to us, it was time to leave Los Angeles. We thought, okay, God's going to lead us to one of these groups. So it was surprising when the Lord said to us, Denver. We felt just the impression, Denver,
Wow.
Colorado, and why? But God doesn't always make a lot of sense. He just wants you to obey him. So when we came out here, then the penny dropped. The understanding came that we were to be a bridge to the nations. We were to make it easier for others to go to unreached areas of the world.
Mm.
Because, a burden and a calling are two different things. Just because you have a passion or a burden for something doesn't mean God's called you to do it. Some burdens are for intercession only. Some are
Wow.
vicarious so that you can invest in others so they, cast the vision, God said to Habakkuk, and that others would run with it. So that's kind of how we ended up in Denver.
That's really good. So are you saying that when you say you went through YWAM in Australia, are you saying you went into the program like as a student initially?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Awesome.
so the entry program into YWAM is called the Discipleship Training School, and it is transformational because it's you come and live for 3 months in a community like the New Testament church,
Yeah.
where you're eating meals together, you're sleeping in dorms usually as a single person at least, and 24/7 you're with these other believers who have a passion for God, and it's, or put it this way, if you went to your home church to Sunday school, Sunday morning service, Sunday night, and then Wednesday night, it would take about 4.5 years to get the same investment you're getting in those 5 months. The last
Wow.
2 months are an outreach overseas. And so
Mm.
my outreach, my DTS Discipleship Training School was in
Mhm.
Canberra, Australia. The outreach was to Argentina.
Wow.
And that's how I ended up in the Western Hemisphere. And
Hmm.
then, the travel agent in Australia messed up my ticket. My ticket was going up, ending in Canada. And then I looked at the dates, and I had to leave early, ended up in New Jersey. Long story short, ended up in California, then doing a secondary program, which was a school of evangelism. And right after that, met Linda, joined the staff in LA, and then that kind of links into the living in Pasadena there with the
Yeah.
U.S. Center for World Missions. Then we were leading the training school, the discipleship training school, until God led us to Denver.
Wow. And so YGram as YWAM, I don't know why I keep saying it wrong. YWAM as a program actually began in, was it 1960
Yeah,
that
yeah,
the
yeah. That
program
was the first
itself actually
training
began?
school.
Okay.
So Lauren Cunningham was a youth
Mhm.
pastor, was on an outreach in the Bahamas and had this vivid vision. It wasn't a dream, but he had this vision of waves crashing against the continents of the world. And then as he looked, each wave went further than the wave that preceded it. And the waves were then changing into young people, and they were going into every nation preaching the gospel. That
Wow.
was in 1957. He then started this outreach with Youth with a Mission, where he would take young people. But he soon realized these young people, uh, although they had many conversions, they were shallow conversions, because you can only make God known as much as you know him. And so
Mhm.
he and his wife Darlene quickly realized we need to have some in-depth knowledge of who God is, his character, his nature, his ways. And so they started this discipleship training school. Well, it was called by a different name to begin with. And the YWAM's motto, I know there are some others that have used this motto since, but YWAM coined this motto: to know God and make him known. You can only make him
Yeah.
known as much as you
That's good.
know him. So 1969, actually. So YWAM started in 1960. 69 in Lausanne, Switzerland was the first YWAM training school, and it's
Hmm.
grown exponentially now, where there are about 750 around the world in
Really?
about 2,000 locations, but about a third of those have training schools.
Wow. So how many countries is YWAM in?
Oh, I don't know. It keeps changing, and then we're supposed to report these things, but the Brazilians never report anything. And and then we, even in my region, right? So I'm the facilitator for YWAM
Mhm.
in the Western US and Canada. Well, I discovered a couple of YWAM bases in
Really?
California I didn't know about, um, because YWAM is very granular, organic, a very, go for it. So
Mhm.
because we're youth now, not all of us are youth any longer, but we'd
I think
rather
you're I
young
think you're
people.
grandfathered in. I think you're grandfathered
Yes,
in.
yeah, yeah, young at heart. I'm one of the
Yeah,
oldest
there you
living
go.
teenagers. So, so, uh, but you make a lot of mistakes. But you know what? Growth is
Mhm.
that way, and it's messy. But you know what? If you look at the history of revival, it's messy too.
Oh,
And so, we'd rather see people go out, make some mistakes, not big mistakes, hopefully, but but be passionate about God and do great things, attempt great things for God, rather than requiring all this training and then limiting what people can do. So as a result, uh, people criticize YWAM for being well, you're doing this with all these young people and they're making mistakes. But from the very beginning, the vision Lauren Cunningham had was to do this. And nobody else had at that time. If you were going to be a missionary, you had to go through seminary, you had to go through all this
Mhm.
training, and God gave him this vision of young people going into every nation. And he
Wow.
went to the head of their denomination, which was the Assemblies of God, and they said, no, no, you can't do it within the assemblies. He wanted to keep it within that denomination,
Mhm.
and they said no, and it really broke his heart. But it was part of God's strategy then for YWAM to be interdenominational. And uh, Lauren and Darlene are in their 80s. They are still, that's their passion. Champion
Mm.
young people. We champion young people is one of our values as a mission.
That's so awesome. That's so cool. Do you have any idea, like any kind of an estimation of like how many young people have actually gone through the program since its inception?
Yeah, well, if you're talking about the discipleship training school, I'm not sure.
Mhm.
But if you add the different outreaches and seminars and the different training platforms that we have that are not necessarily just the 5 month long school, it's about 5 million, somewhere between 5 and 6 million.
5
Uh,
or 6 million.
yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing.
And most of those
Whew.
people are not in YWAM, have not even stayed in missions. But, going through this in-depth training, it ruins you for the ordinary. And these people have gone back to their hometown and have become better husbands and wives and parents
Yeah.
because of that investment in their lives. So I think that for Lauren and Darlene Cunningham, that's part of their legacy. Is even though now some of those people have stayed in missions long term. My wife and I have for over 40 years.
Mhm.
Have are missionary trainers and continue to go, but the vast majority don't stay involved, but it just launches them into an in-depth relationship with God that lasts them a lifetime.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine that it's the kind of program that a lot of young people probably go to just for the sake of getting clarity or even for the sake of uh, tell me if this is true or not. Do a lot of young people come into the program for the sake of getting their life together? You know, of like they've gone through something, maybe they're struggling with some kind of, maybe it's an addiction or some sort of an issue in their life. Is it the kind of thing that a lot of people show up to for the sake of just sort of they want to set aside some specific time to maybe either get free from certain things or just to establish a solid foundation in their life?
Yeah, exactly. Uh, although the ideal candidate
Uh,
is someone who doesn't have a lot of baggage, but in
mhm.
the discipleship training school, God deals with a lot of that.
Mm.
Uh, but and so yes, a lot of them come, but it's not like a teen challenge or some program that's a rehabilitation program. The the purpose is to to come in and then have this launch pad that sends you
Mhm.
forth. And because if you're still doing a lot of this internally, you can't do that very well, and
True.
so it takes a lot longer. And I would say that's more the role of the local church, where you know there's a lot of that dealing with some of these habit patterns and other things. But of course, we all have some degree of baggage.
Mhm.
But that's who it was designed for, and not just young people anymore, but people that have a hunger to serve God, and this becomes this launch pad that shoots them out. But
Yeah.
yeah, we have in today's world a lot of unchurched kids. I remember one kid on the front row in one of the lectures the first week put up his hand and said, "Who was Abraham?" He didn't know who
Mm.
Abraham was. So he'd got saved on the street somewhere back in Ohio or someplace, and
Mhm.
really was unchurched and did not even know who Abraham was. So yeah, uh, we will take pretty much anyone unless they've got some really deep
Hmm.
stuff that really requires a little bit more time.
Yeah. Well, it's whenever you step outside of your normal life and the normal flow of life and your comfort zone, and so you're coming into a program where, for for a few months, we're living in a community. As you said, you related it to the Bible, to the book of Acts, to the early church, sort of like living in this communal setting, and just like this intense time of receiving all of this instruction and teaching and training. It's such an awesome atmosphere for just hearing from the Lord and getting clarity. And I would imagine that there are some that come in that maybe have this idea of, maybe similar to like what you had. You had this idea like God was calling you, and you figured, well, God's calling me into missions, so He's going to call me to go to an unreached part of the world or something like that. But then what his actual idea for you and for Linda was, a little bit different than what you would have, just prescribed for yourselves. And, I would just imagine that being in that kind of an atmosphere, it's probably pretty similar. Like when I went to Elam Bible Institute in college, and I signed up. So they had the program, where you could sign up. You can sign up for the full program, or you could sign up for, they called it the Year in the Sun, and is basically just a year. But they were wise enough to know that often that first year would turn into more than 1 year. So they organized it so that that first year was very, very similar to somebody who was there for the full program, so that you could very easily switch. And so that's what I did. I didn't know what I was doing. Like I knew all my life that God had called me. I knew that I was supposed to be in ministry. I knew all that, but I had some weird ideas in my head too. And so I was like, all right, God, I know you want me to go to Elam. Like I went to visit, and God spoke to me very clearly. I knew I was supposed to go there, but I was like, I'm only going to give you a year because I don't want to do this. And, so after I was there for a year, it ended up switching, and I knew that God was calling me to stay longer. And so I went through the entire program. But that year of just, there's just something about saying it's kind of like fasting, right? Like there's just something about saying, I'm going to set aside some time where it's about you. I'm going to seek your face. I'm gonna go after you. I'm gonna get trained. I'm gonna get taught. I'm going to, just kind of get outside of the normalcy of my life and my comfort zone. That's really, really powerful, right?
Oh, yes, it is. Because it takes, they tell us it takes about 3 months to change a habit pattern. And
Yeah.
so, if you want to actually, you've got a bad habit pattern in your life that actually maybe has become part of your character, uh, it's going to take some discipline and choices. And for most of us, it helps to have some other people with us who are on the same track, helping us, standing with us. And after about 12 to 15 weeks, somewhere in there, we're really able to replace that with a godly habit patterns
Mm,
in our lives of walking with Him and having a quiet time and avoiding doing certain things or saying certain things. And so yeah, it does take uh, time, but that immersion that you described, and I love Elam. One of my best friends was an Elam pastor in New
mm,
York for 20 years, and in fact,
that's awesome.
he came and did our first discipleship training school in Denver in
Really,
'85.
that's cool.
Yeah, Jack and Sandy Hemfling, and
That's awesome.
yeah, they pastored in New York. But yeah, Elam has a lot of similarities, I think, to YWAM, uh, and from what I can see in people that I've met, some of the Elamites. I don't know what you call
Yeah,
yourselves. We call ourselves
that's what it was when I
YWAMers.
was there.
Really, an
The
Elamite?
YWAMers. Yeah, we were Elamites when I was there. I'm not sure if they still subscribe to that or not, but yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there's something about that immersion that with others, like you said, the Book of Acts, that is transformational.
Mhm.
Uh, and Jesus didn't come just to save us; He came to transform us.
It's good.
But we need many times more than just. Uh, there are some exceptional people who have the ability on their own to make decisions and change ungodly habit patterns and establish new ones. just through the sheer force of their will. But most of us, we
Mm.
need others that we can bounce things off, and that we can with whom we can make ourselves accountable. And I need that still. I a friend of mine.
Yeah.
Maybe I can. I don't know if I got a couple of minutes. I can share this
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
with you. Incredible thing here in the last couple of years. So one of my best friends pastors a church in Huntington Beach, California.
Mm. Mhm.
Bill Welsh. Bill Welsh is the pastor of the Refuge Calvary Chapel in Huntington Beach, Surf City, USA.
Oh, yeah.
And I was speaking at his church, and he has a Saturday night service and 3 Sunday morning services. But Saturday afternoon, we went for a walk on the beach and just began to open up as brothers in the Lord about stuff we were going through.
Mm.
And he told me later, I just felt like I was taking a risk of being able to even share some of these things, and it just blessed me that you were not judgmental, but we prayed for each other, and because we all have faced temptations in life, and the next that evening in church, he introduced me as this is my storm brother, Peter, and I asked him what you know storm brother, what is that? And he played me this little tape from Garrison Keillor, Prairie Home Companion. I don't know if you've ever heard of those, but it's a radio
Yes.
program,
Mhm.
and he talks about news from Lake Wobegon and these kids in the country in Minnesota who would be bussed into the school. The principal assigned to each one of them a storm home. In case there was a blizzard and they couldn't bus them back out to their houses, they could go and stay with their storm family.
Gotcha.
And he says, well, there were no blizzards that year or the next year. They were all convenient blizzards, night blizzards, weekend blizzards. But his house was called, I think they were called the Krugers. Okay, and this family, this kindly old couple lived there, and he never went to stay with them, but just knowing they were there as his storm family gave him such comfort and security. And
Yeah.
Bill said, and that we all need storm brothers. And so he and I started uh, this gathering where we it's by invitation, where we invite senior pastors and ministry leaders to come away for 3 days, and we call them Storm Brothers retreats,
Mm.
and where we just open up and go, okay, what's the battle you're fighting right now, personally, in your personal life, and what's God speaking to you in that battle, and what are you going to do about it? And it's become so powerful. So we schedule these, Bill and I do, where we invite guys, and it just struck a chord with so many of these leaders, because it all happened about the time where some significant ministry leaders in the U.S. had fallen, or it came to
Wow.
light they'd been involved in areas of sin, and like King David, none of us can say, "Oh, I'm beyond that. That's not going to happen to me." And
Oh,
so
yeah.
this has become so powerful in our lives to have these Storm Brothers retreats. So really,
Mm.
I say that to emphasize that we all need others in our lives that can help us and that we can walk with. And so that's what the DTS, the Discipleship Training School, does that. And what you described as your year in the sun, I think that accomplished that. And here you are serving the Lord today. And some of it's probably because of that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's something that's just so profound and so important about those relationships, those close relationships that you have with people who you're kind of like, I don't know, walking through the fire with, even
Yeah.
sometimes, you're walking through difficult seasons of life or challenging seasons, or, and when you have people that God brings into your life that you can walk through those times with, and the good times as well, but when we walk through life with people and learn how to do life with people, I just think that we're made for that. We're built for that. We're designed for that. Like, if I've got circumstances in my life that for one reason or another are preventing me from really having close fellowship with somebody. Like, I can't even think of what that might be, but like if there's something in my life that's preventing me from having fellowship with brothers and sisters in Christ, God's so good that he's able to fill those gaps. He's our ultimate source, and he provides everything that we need. We can be fully complete in him. But I don't think that that's his ultimate goal for us. I don't think that that's his desire for us. I think that his desire is for us to be in community, and for us to have people around us that are, somewhat like-minded, and that we're going after the same things, that we can build each other up and recognize that when we
Yes.
do have struggles, and that we can share our faults with, and we can share, things that are heavy on our hearts and things like that. Because when we keep those things bottled up, then I think, like you said, you mentioned some leaders that had fallen and some different things. Like, I think that that is the end result of not having people that you are able to walk through life with, to do
Yes.
life
Oh,
with. And
absolutely. And one of
yeah.
my heroes, Duke, is Billy Graham, or the late
Hmm.
Billy Graham,
Yeah.
and he, started. He preached his first sermon in Florida, I think, at age 19, and then his ministry took off. But he realized early on he needed to uh, make sure he had these standards, and he had people around him. Even when he began to travel, he then had uh, a friend who would go into a hotel room ahead of time,
Uh-huh.
and just to make sure nobody was waiting in there, or just it went to almost, it seemed, to an extreme.
Hmm.
But his way of operating became known as the Billy Graham standard, and other pastors began to emulate that. Then the Billy Graham standard of having such a high integrity level that uh, because we need that. We need to have those standards, and then others that we can share our hearts with, and we know they're going to be there for us, who are going to speak the truth, but in love. It's got to be, truth
Hmm.
without love is harsh, but love without truth can lead to compromise. And so you have to,
Absolutely.
like the Apostle Paul said, speaking the truth in love. And then he went on to say that that leads to growth in a person's life. So yeah, we do need those storm brothers and sisters who will speak the truth in love to us, which is community. That's the early church, right? And
Mm.
I think
Yeah.
what's worked against us is our affluence more than anything else. We have Our affluence has allowed us, especially in Western nations, to be independent. And we even look at independence as a value when really it's a type of sin. we need to we need to be dependent on others. Yeah, I know
Yes.
there's
Yeah.
aspects of independence and freedom that are important, but uh, our affluence has allowed us to live in our own houses, and we don't even barely have to talk to our neighbors, and we don't have to depend on others. The early church was under persecution, and that was part of the reason that they had community, and they would meet together from house to
Wow.
house. And maybe one day when they say you can't buy or sell anymore without this mark, we don't have to buy or sell. We can give and receive. We're going to have to change the way we operate
Come
when
on.
things are taken away from us potentially. But it might be a good thing for us spiritually in the end.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people look at, when you read the book of Revelation, and you read about those things happening. I think the traditional view is to look at that as something that's scary, that nobody wants to be here for, and all of that. But if you pay attention, I believe that that's the most glorious time of the church, in history. That,
Yes.
in the midst of the persecution, in the midst of this, I mean, we see what happened in the book of Acts when they came under persecution, how the gospel spread throughout the entire world in the midst of that happened. And yeah, I do think that, we're very soft. We're very soft in this country, in particular. And not saying that I'm gung ho about having persecution come our
No,
way. I'm just
no,
I'm just saying
no.
that that in the midst of it, if that does happen at some point, I'm sure it will happen. If that does happen, then it's again, it's a time for the church. The darker the background, the more opportunity that the church has to really shine forth the love and the
Yes.
goodness of who God really is. I think that we had an opportunity as the church, even in this past couple of years that we've had through just the darkness that's been surrounding our world, through lockdowns, through COVID, through so many, deaths happening due to the pandemic. And in this country, due to a lot of the violence and the racial tension and different things that happened, I think we had a really great opportunity as the people of God to really stand up and declare who God is, and to show the world what love really is in the midst of it. I think that by and large, we probably didn't do a great job with it. A lot of people did, a lot of churches did. I don't know about overall. I know that there was a lot of division within the church when there should not have been. But there is something about difficult circumstances that just, I don't know. There's something about the positioning of God within his people within those circumstances. I think what it is, I think it's hope. I think when we hold on to hope, when we hold on to who God is, and we don't get rocked and shaken by the circumstances of life, but we allow our lives to be anchored in the reality of who God is, how faithful he is, how powerful he is, how loving he is in the midst of it, that we do have such an opportunity to demonstrate that and show him
Yeah.
to the world.
Yeah. And I think the highest is that we wouldn't have to be forced into it through persecution or
Come
difficulty,
on.
but by
Yeah,
choosing it, by saying,
that's
Lord,
good.
I'm gonna choose to do this, to reach out to others, to
Hmm.
to be uh, Jesus in this body, in the way I speak and act and everything else. That's the highest. But yeah, sometimes being spiritually lazy, we tend to uh, kind of, sometimes we need something imposed on us, and it's not always a bad thing when you look at the history of the church.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Well, Peter, what about you? Did you grow up in a Christian home, or how did you come to know the Lord?
Yeah, I did. And my dad was a pastor in
It's
Australia.
awesome.
My
Very cool.
mum was a nurse, and she went as a single woman to the mission field in northern Australia with the Aborigines, a place called Owen Pelly, on I think it was the East Alligator River,
Hmm.
in the Northern Territory. My dad, then in Bible school, began to have a passion for missions as well. And he thought he was going to be going to Tanganyika, which is modern day Tanzania, Malawi, and
Hmm.
Southeast Africa. My mum was headed to India, and when they fell in love, they went to the mission board, and the mission board sent them to an island in the Gulf of Carpentaria, which is, well, there's a big gulf at the top end of Australia called the
Okay.
Gulf of Carpentaria, and there's a big island there called Groot Island, which is Dutch for big island. Groot, I think it is in Dutch, because the Dutch actually
Uh-huh.
discovered Australia. They just didn't claim it, and then Captain Cook did for the British Crown. But
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
you got a lot of Dutch, like Tasmania. It was Abel Tasman, who was another Dutch explorer. But anyway, so uh, my parents then went to this island in the Gulf of Carpentaria, Groot Island. My dad was the chaplain, and my mum was the nurse in Anyangula on the island. That's where I was born, uh, with the Australian Aborigines. Then we later on moved back to Sydney. My dad pastored for a while, and then we went to South America. And so I actually lived for most of my teenage years in South America.
Really?
Um, yep, Paraguay and Argentina. And then
Hmm.
there was a lot of civil unrest and, well, I don't need to go into a whole lot of detail, but the former president came back out of exile. His name was Juan Perón. You've probably heard of Evita. That was his first wife, Eva
Hmm.
Perón. And there was just a lot of military conflict and people were being killed, and so
Mm.
we moved back to Australia. Uh, I gave my life to the Lord. Apparently, I barely remembered it. My mum led me to the Lord when I was 7, uh, but then uh, I I kind of fell away from the Lord uh, after we went back to Australia. Got involved in pornography, got involved in drugs, and it was the tail end of the hippie movement. I took off hitchhiking around the world. Of course, you can't hitchhike out of Australia, so I had to get on a ship to Panama, hitchhike through South
Wow.
America, uh, headed off to Europe to hike the hippie trail that went from Amsterdam to Nepal and Afghanistan and
Wow.
India, and was going to meet up with my friends in Greece, and was put in jail uh, and sent back to Australia. Uh,
Wow.
and But it was the hand of the Lord. My mum had been praying for me. I was really ticked off, that they interrupted my plans. But when I got back to Australia, uh, my dad gave me this brochure of this 1 week outreach with YWAM in Canberra, and I said, well, what the heck? I don't have anything else to do right now. And I went, and my life was so radically changed that 1 week.
Wow.
I recommitted my life to Christ, was baptized again, because, my dad was an Anglican minister, so I'd been baptized as an infant, but got
Mm.
rebaptized and came right into the discipleship training school right after that. Uh, so I'm really grateful God changed the direction of my life. I
Yeah.
could have persisted in my rebellion against God,
Hmm.
but the scripture that says that God works all things toward the counsel of His will. The word "works" there. It makes it seem like God is the one who is orchestrating everything, but the word in Greek is energio, for works, which means we get the word energize from that. So He doesn't
Mm.
make us come back to Him, but He makes it a lot easier by energizing, sort of
Good.
pushing us in a direction.
It's
And
good.
I think prayer has a huge part of that. My mum and dad were praying for me every day, especially my mother, and God just interrupted my wayward journey as a prodigal
Mm.
and got me sent back to Australia, put in jail, sent back to Australia, and that changed everything.
It's what's really interesting to me is how you went all around the world basically in rebellion, like before you I don't know if maybe you knew, maybe you had an idea, some kind of an awareness that God had called you to a life of missions and ministry. But it's interesting to me that you went all the way sort of around the world, just kind of on your own, in your own strength, doing your own thing. And then I'm just wondering, do you think that God used that to on any level to sort of put missions in your heart? Or I mean, is that something that was already in your heart before all that? Or do you think that, that time of just kind of, how God will take even our
Yeah,
own mess ups and mistakes and bad moves and stuff like that, and he'll use them and repurpose them because he's just good at that kind of stuff.
yeah,
But
yeah,
you
he
think
is.
that played a role?
I don't know. I think from early on, we traveled around the world, and when we went to South America, I was 7,
Hmm.
and we went on a ship around the bottom of Australia, up through Sri Lanka. It was called Ceylon then, and India, and
Hmm.
up through the Suez Canal. That was before it was bombed in 1964, where
Wow.
it was cut off, and up through Europe, and then down through Africa to South America, and then we would go back to Australia every 3 or 4 years on furlough, flying sometimes on a ship as well, but sometimes flying across the Pacific, Easter Island, Tahiti. I mean, all these exotic places. But
Wow.
um, just I became very comfortable with the nations and people that
Hmm.
were spoke different languages and never felt really endangered. Or there is a lot of fear, I think, that the media projects about going to some of these places. But
Sure.
I have a relative that's in the armed forces, and he was saying actually it's more dangerous to live in Washington D.C. than in Iraq.
Yeah.
This was a few years ago, and so
Man.
uh, you know, places are not as dangerous as we would think, and people are even in nations that are maybe anti the West. Think of some Islamic nations, but the people are the friendliest, nicest. They don't know Jesus many times, but they are
Mm.
culturally they are friendly. And anyway, it
Yeah.
just gave me a maybe God was setting it up, Duke. But I just became very comfortable being out there,
Yeah.
traveling from one nation to another,
It's in your blood.
and it's in my blood, and it still is. And I haven't been out of America in 2 years, so it's killing me in that sense.
You're
But
itching. Yeah.
yeah, I'm itching to go out. But I mean, I've been to Africa over 30 times, and Africa's like
Mm.
a different. If you've never been to Africa, it is like a different planet. Everything is different, and India and some of these places, and it's actually really exciting to immerse yourself in these different cultures and learn some of
Yeah.
the cultural mindset and values they have, and taste some of the food, and it really is incredible. So maybe God was preparing it, but I love what I get to do now, which is to train people to go, but then to be able to go myself for sure.
Yeah.
Modern
It's awesome.
missions is, I mean, if you think about this, okay,
Hmm.
it took Paul. Well, Paul was stranded in one port for the whole winter because of a storm, right? And fast forward uh, until 1959, nobody had experienced jet lag before, because that's when the first, at least the general population, the first commercial jetliner was introduced to the world. And from that moment on, you could travel anywhere on Earth in about 24 to 48 hours. And
Hmm.
that really made the whole world like a global village. Someone described the world as a global village where we
Hmm.
could, the whole planet is our own backyard, and we can go anywhere. And really, in terms of missions, we're living in a day and age that is like no other, where we can literally go anywhere on earth. And the remaining barriers to the gospel are not the geopolitical barriers, they're those ethno linguistic barriers. And,
Yeah.
excuse me, only a few nations now, people groups now that don't have a witness. So we're really uh, seeing seeing the gospel go to the very ends of the earth in the last 20 to 30 years. It really is remarkable.
Yeah. It's incredible. Whew. It's an adventurous life, man. It's awesome.
Yeah.
I love how, when you decide to follow Jesus and you listen to his way and you follow his plan for your life, just the adventure that he takes you on, and how it's so much better than anything that you could have fathomed on your own, as far as, what you'd be doing. You spent all this time, in Australia and South America, and then you end up in Colorado of all places. Had you really, and I know you were in California for a season before you went to Colorado, but had you really experienced the cold and the snow on that level before?
No, 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 no. First time I saw snow was when I came to the United
Okay,
States,
that's exciting.
and yeah, it's exciting at the beginning,
At the
and
beginning, yeah.
then
Yep.
and until it's not anymore. When
Yeah,
you have
like
to
day
shovel it
7.
every day.
Day 7, like, you're done already. Like, "All right,
Yes.
this could stop forever now."
But I keep reminding the Lord, this was your idea to bring me here to Denver, Lord. Because I'm both my wife's from San Diego, I'm from Sydney. We're beach people. And God
Yeah.
brought us here to the middle of America where there's no beach. Now, the mountains are nice. It's a nice trade off.
Mhm.
But we always go on vacation to the beach whenever we can. But the, uh, Colorado, the interesting thing about Denver is a lot of people don't know this, especially people from Michigan. and places like that think that Denver is the same as, you know, Grand Rapids or Minneapolis, and it's totally
Mm,
different because it's a
hmm.
semi-arid climate. And
Yeah.
I play golf. I played golf in January, and I played golf last week. Now we've got a milder winter, but uh, you know, the snow melts off here, which everything's pretty ugly because it's all brown. But yeah, it's really sunny. I guess at least the Colorado Tourism Board says there's 300 days of sun a year in Denver. So we'll get some big
Well, you're
storms, but then the
practically
snow
above the
melts off.
clouds, right?
Yeah, well, it's a mile
Just
above, yeah, a
just
mile
about.
above sea level. Yeah, but we
Yeah,
did one
it's
time.
pretty
We had
crazy.
3 feet of snow when I was
Mm,
here. That's the most we've ever had, and that lasted a while.
yeah.
Yeah.
Have you embraced any of the winter activities? Like, do you do skiing, snowboarding, anything like that?
Well, Duke, I used to, but now I'm trying to be wise, and
Okay.
so yeah, I got friends my age who still do that, but it's pretty expensive, uh, you know, to be doing
Yeah.
that. So,
Hmm.
and with my travel, no, I haven't done it recently. I still golf, and I enjoy that for sure.
That's good. I don't know if you know where I'm at. I'm in Alabama, and I'm originally from New Jersey, and spent most of my time in New Jersey and New York. I was a missionary in Mexico for about 3 years.
Oh,
But,
really?
so after Elam, I went back to New Jersey for a year, and then I was in Mexico with my wife, for 3 years as missionaries, and then we ended up here in Alabama, and we've been here ever since, and, so I really miss I'm on the other spectrum, like, I really miss the snow. I've always loved snow, and I was really into snowboarding and stuff like that, and so I miss it. But it's yeah. So when I get the opportunity, so I'm kind of like opposite. I'm more into. I always enjoyed like those beach vacations and did that for most of my life. But now, when we do get the opportunity to go somewhere, I'm always like mountains, like somewhere somewhere with mountains, somewhere where there's snow or something, you know.
Now,
But
where were you in Mexico?
a city called Morelia, which
Morelia.
is in the state of Michoacan. Yeah, as you were saying before, and it's kind of in the middle of the country, about 4 hours from Mexico City. The state of Michoacan is a coastal state. Um, it's on the west. It's on the western side of Mexico, and there are, if you go all the way west you'll hit the coast, and there's beautiful beaches there and stuff like that. But we were about 4 hours inland,
Right.
in that state. So, but yeah, it's
Wow.
interesting what you were saying about, how when I was there in Mexico, people were always worried about me, thinking, because they hear the news about Mexico and the violence and the drug cartels and all of this kind of stuff. And there were happenings, for sure there were happenings in the city we were in. There were definitely happenings, things went down. But I never felt it, if that makes sense. Like there's just something
Yeah.
about, where I live, I could drive, 20 minutes and be in a pretty difficult part of town, where there's a lot of
Yeah.
violence and things like that happening too. So I just think it's, perspective of what you hear. And as you said, I do think that the media really tries to portray things in the harshest way possible a lot of times.
Well, they report everything as well. So you have a, a reporting of the worst possible things that are happening uh, in 7.5 billion people around the world,
Right.
and you're sitting in your living room or on your computer, and and you're going, "Oh man, the world is going to hell in a handbasket." But in reality, they're just taking the worst possible snippets. And you're right, it's not. You just have to be wise. If you live in Chicago,
Sure.
you have to be wise where you go, what you do. But it's really it's not as violent as it was in the Middle Ages or other times in history. Uh,
Yeah,
that's not to minimize it, but
that's for
yeah.
sure.
And
Yeah.
so you speak a little Spanish. ¿Hablas español todavía un poquito?
Sí, hablo bien. Bueno, más o menos hablo bien. De hecho, hacemos we do a service on Sunday mornings in Spanish, my wife and I.
Oh,
We have an
fantastic.
English service and a Spanish service, and so I still use it a
Now,
lot.
where are
Still
you
use
in
it a lot.
Alabama? Where are you in
Mobile, Alabama, as deep south as
Mobile?
you can get unless until you go to Florida. Yeah, we're down here practically on the Gulf. So
Yeah.
it's hot and
Well,
humid and rains always.
okay. Yeah. My
But I
my
but I
um
love it. I love my city.
my uh my one of our daughter's husbands, her parents live in Huntsville, Alabama,
Okay.
which is
At the
probably
top.
about
Yeah.
4 or 5 hours north of you.
Mhm. Yeah, probably
But
5.
yeah. So you going to be barracking, we call it in Australia, or rooting for the Crimson Tide this Friday, or are you an
Yeah.
Auburn fan?
No, I mean, okay, so here's the thing. I'm not from here. So, um, I don't know. I'm not, I like Alabama. I follow them, but I kind of follow Auburn a little bit too. I know I'm not allowed to do that. Um, I know it's not like the normal thing, but it's, yeah, so I'm just kind of but yeah, no, I will watch and root for them and stuff like that, but, like, it's weird, because 'cause I'm from New Jersey. I grew up watching Penn State,
Transplant,
and I
right?
yeah, I grew up, like, watching Penn State, and for some reason, Notre Dame, I liked them, but I'm not as into it as I mean, down here, college football is life for people.
Yes,
I was always more into I mean, I'm into, like, NFL football, but I'm also, like, really into baseball and, like, soccer and people or football, excuse me, sir, football.
yes. No, we call it soccer in
The real
Australia.
the real Oh, you do? I did not know that.
Yeah, yeah, because Australia is similar to the US in that we've got a whole bunch of sports that we play that are different. Uh, I mean, some of them are we've inherited from Britain, like cricket
Mhm, cricket, yeah.
and rugby. There's two kinds of rugby, but the main sport in Australia is called Aussie rules football. Have you ever seen Australian rules football?
Uh,
It's a oval that's 200 meters, so it's two football fields length and wider, and 18 players aside, and and it's full tackle, and you pass it like a volleyball, and you have to bounce this oval ball. It's the craziest thing you've ever seen, but that's the number one sport in Australia. So as a result, we call it soccer. Um,
okay, okay.
but yeah, but anyway, being in Argentina and Paraguay, I grew up playing soccer, football down there
Mhm,
as well. But when I came to America, this is the most amazing thing. I loved gridiron football the very first time I
mhm.
saw it,
It's awesome.
uh, which I've come to realize most non-Americans
Don't
that
get it.
doesn't happen. No, but for me, probably because I love strategy, uh, it became this. It was like, man, this is like a game of chess, but with violence added in, because it's all about
Yeah.
strategy. You can win a game with better coaching uh, in gridiron, where there's very
Mhm.
few other games that the coaching matters as much on the day of
Right.
the game. You know,
True.
so
Mhm.
anyway, but I'm a Clemson fan actually when it comes
Really?
to to college football because one of my best friends uh, is from that
Mhm.
area, and we vacation in Seneca, which is right across
Okay,
the
cool.
lake there from Clemson every summer. And we go then in the winter we'll go to a game usually. So yeah, and then I have to be a
Awesome.
Broncos fan, unfortunately,
Yeah, I
right
was gonna
now.
ask, but I figured, unfortunately. Well, listen, man, it's not worse than I'm a Giants fan. I'm a New York Giants fan, so it's
Oh
just
yeah,
it's just
that's
bad. It's just it's a dumpster fire. It's bad.
yeah.
So, I can't say anything.
Well, well. Anyway, America is a very amazing nation. God has invested so much in this nation, and when you look at the history, Uh, America is a leader in the world, and I think there's a target that this nation there's a battle going on behind the battle. The reality most people see is not the
Mm,
ultimate reality. There is a
that's
battle
right.
for the soul of America right now, and when you travel, or if you're from overseas, you realize that there is a uh, this nation is a leader. Other nations look to America as a leader, and when a leader falls, whether it's a spiritual leader that we talked about earlier or any kind of leader, there's a ripple effect that impacts many other people.
Wow.
And so there is a spiritual battle going on for this nation because of the heritage of the number of Christians, even from the beginning of this nation, the separatists and the pilgrims and people that came
Mm,
over for religious freedom. It is remarkable when you look at other nations, what God has invested in America. And we need to be praying for this nation right now because it is hanging in the balance and could go either way.
mm, wow. Yeah, it bothers me when a stance or perception is taking that's like fatalistic, like, oh well, America's screwed, America's going to hell in a hand, but that kind of thing. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, we're going down a path, and there's certain things where you can kind of see the writing on the wall, but I just don't believe, I'm with you, like I don't believe that our response should be that of there's no hope, that our
Absolutely.
response needs to be to pray. Our response shouldn't be one of the things that just a major pet peeve of mine is just the blatant like disrespect that I see hurled toward our political leaders and governing officials. It's one thing to, as you said, speak the truth in love, but it's
Yeah.
another thing to just be blatantly disrespectful to the authority of the position. And,
Yeah.
that's something that drives me crazy among Christians, because I'm like, okay, like I get that you're in starch disagreement with what's happening here, with like whether it's a law that's passed or just an overall ideology or, policy, whatever it is.
Yes.
Like I get it. And more often than not, I'm with you. But I think that we lose the battle when we don't fight the right way. And as you said,
Yes.
like we're called to pray, we're called to pray. We're called to declare and stand in agreement with the heart of God to see how he would lead us, how he would guide us to, how to intercede, but like
Yes.
so often I think we're so quick to judge and condemn and to tear down when we haven't even taken a moment to step back and see, okay, God, what's on your heart in the midst of this situation and what's going on here? And how can I partner with you to actually see
Yeah.
your kingdom established here on the earth where we live?
Yes.
You know?
Oh, I'm with you 100%. And it
Yeah.
does not have to be a certain way. You know, that whole que sera, sera, the inshallah, the fatalistic
Mm,
mentality. Do you
yes.
know all the other religions of the world are fatalistic? All of them. Islam
Wow.
more than any other, but
Hmm.
Buddhism, Hinduism, they're all fatalistic, and people are trying to make Christianity into a fatalistic mindset that we would have. And I'm with you 100%. I know there are some who
Mm,
would disagree, but I believe prayer does change things. I believe
absolutely.
God gives us the opportunity to create history, to change the direction of history through
Come
our
on.
choices, through our actions, through our prayers. So yeah, I believe with all my heart that God calls us to create with Him. You know, Genesis 1:1 says, "In the beginning, God created." So was that the last time?
Mm.
Or is he still creating? And if he's still creating, if God's still creating, does he give us a place to co create with him? And I,
Mm.
I think
Oh
he
yeah.
does. I think he's the living God, and he gives us an opportunity to right now, not against his will, but going, okay, God, what is your will? And then beginning to act and pray in accordance with his will. So I have, we had a situation that happened here years ago. where a former student came in and shot four of our
Mhm.
staff. Two of them died that night, and it
Mhm.
led me to write a book about this called When the Shooting Stopped. Where's God when we suffer? Why does God allow suffering in the world? And one of the things, Duke, that just impacted me powerfully is uh, I was studying what is God's will. Was this something that God orchestrated? Because there were people who had that fatalistic bias who were saying, well, God's in control of this. He allowed this to happen. And
Right.
and I felt like, no, this didn't have to happen this way. People have choices, but what is God's will? And I found there's actually two different words for God's will in the New Testament.
Mm.
One is bulamai, and the other is thelema. And bulamai is what God has ordained,
Mhm.
something that God has willed. But thelema is is actually, it's translated God's will, but it's God's wish. It's related
Mm.
to God's preferred will. So when the Bible says, "In everything give thanks, for this is the will of God," it's His wish. It's His thelema, but it doesn't always happen. Not everybody gives
Sure.
thanks. So there's some things that happen that go against God's will. And man, that was just
Hmm.
impacted me so much. Is we need to pray according to God's will. In the Lord's Prayer, when Jesus said, pray that His will would be done on earth as it is in heaven, it's thelema. It's that
Wow.
his preferred will would happen. And so He gives us a place, not only through our actions, but in our prayers, to agree with God and to pray His will into existence in every situation. And wow, what an incredible ability we have to
Mm.
co-create with the living God, that
Come
He
on.
partners with us in this way. So yeah, I'm with you 100%. Things don't have to be a certain way. God gives us the ability to to change the direction of history.
Come on.
And
Yeah.
so yeah, revival can happen. This does not have to go badly in the coming years and decades if the Lord tarries.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I'm so with you. And yeah, I say this sometimes just because it kind of ruffles feathers, and then I explain what I mean. Because there's this thing that a lot of people say, well, God is in control, and it's just something that people kind of throw around. I'm like, well, God's not necessarily in control of of everything. He could be.
Yeah,
He's
he could
definitely
be.
in charge. Yeah, he definitely could be. He can do whatever he wants. He's sovereign.
Yes.
But he's also put so much into the hands of his people to partner with him, as you said, to have this privilege of walking in the authority that he's given to us, to partner with his heart, to see history changed, to see transformation happen here on the earth, to see his kingdom established here on the earth in
Come
incredible
on.
ways. And it's like, yeah, again, that sort of fatalistic idea of, well, if God wants it to happen, it'll happen. Well, not if the church doesn't stand up and actually see what God is saying in this season, in this hour, and partner with him to actually move with his heart, and to and
Yes.
to and to do what he wants to do, to be led, to be directed by the Holy Spirit. And it's just like, God does very little on the earth outside of agreement with his people, if anything. I don't want to
Yes.
just say zero, because God's bigger than my thinking, but it's I think he does very, very little outside of that agreement on the earth with his people. And
And what a
it's
privilege
amazing.
that is. What an
Absolutely.
adventure and a privilege that he gets to that we get to partner with the living
Mm.
God in this, to say, God, what is it that you want to do in this situation, and
Yeah.
then move in accordance with Him. Uh, I think that's the way
Mm.
Jesus operated. Clearly, He is God and was God, but He did nothing of His own accord, only
Right.
what He saw the Father doing. And so, Father, what is it that you want to do in this situation in my family, or at work, or at school, or right now in this nation? What is your dream,
Mm.
Lord? I want to move in faith in accordance with this, and not only aim for
Mm.
this, but to pray this into existence and to believe you for it. And man, I believe, Duke, that that God has another card to deal in the history of America,
Wow.
and it's not set and done, you know, the way it is right now. But I'm just praying that uh, that uh, that God would bring about His purposes and salvage many of the things that have been lost.
So good.
Yeah,
Well, Peter, man, I really appreciate you. I thank you so much for your time and being here with me. I've really enjoyed kind of picking your brain a little bit and just hearing your story and having this conversation that we had. And I really do, and I did plan on. I wanted to ask you about your book, which you brought up just a minute ago, but I don't want us to I don't know. I don't want to rush that conversation because there's some things that I know that we can get into dealing with forgiveness and some different just beautiful things that I think did come out of that tragedy that took place back in 2007 on the campus there
yeah,
at YWAM in Denver. So I'm just wondering, would if maybe what we should do is kind of wrap up this conversation, and I would love to have you back on at some point in the future, not to put you under pressure or anything like that,
yeah,
but I'd love to have you back on at some point in the future so that we could kind of get maybe devote the whole thing to that conversation because it's something that I'm very much just interested in hearing your heart on and telling people. But I do want to point people though to your book. I know that it's available on Amazon. It's also available on your website. The book is called When the Shooting Stopped, and the subtitle is Where is God When We Suffer? And
yeah.
if you would, Peter, just give a just kind of in your own words a plug for the book and what it's about and your heart when you wrote it.
Yeah, so the best way to get it is actually through my website because
Hmm.
the audio can be purchased through Amazon, but something happened where they shut things down for selling my book, which is the craziest thing.
Okay.
But peterwarrenministries.com is the best way to get it.
Awesome.
But basically, in a nutshell, I felt I was to tell the story because there's so many redemptive parts to this. Even though two of our staff was shot and killed, four were shot, two died. Out of it came this amazing sort of a seed that fell into the ground and died, but yielded much fruit. We saw thousands of
Mm,
people, thousands come to Christ, which I bring out in the book, and recommit their lives to Christ as a result of it. But I started to write the story, and then you know how it is with the Lord. Sometimes He taps you on the shoulder and says, "Actually, I have a slightly different plan than you
mhm.
do." And I felt like the Lord wanted me to look at all the different types of suffering in the world and where's God? Why doesn't He intervene sometimes? Why is there judgment on sin? Why does God? Why are there accidents? Why do people get cancer? You know, things like that. And
Yeah,
looking
yeah.
at looking at the whole thing through the lens of Scripture. So it's very biblically based. I narrowed it down to 10 sources of suffering and that are, that occur in the world, and what do the Scriptures have to say about this? And I even go into why did God say go and destroy whole villages, including men, women,
Hmm.
children, animals? Why would God, a loving God, say that? And actually, there are
Wow.
answers in God's word. And I go into this in detail. So I've got a bibliography of over 100 books. I did a
Hmm.
lot of research. It took me about 2 years to write because of
Wow.
it being such a broad topic that I had to narrow down. And uh, it will take time to read because you have to go have your Bible right there and go, wait a minute, what is this? And then going back into some of
Okay.
the original Hebrew and Greek and seeing, like I mentioned about God's will, that not everything is God's will because sometimes what's translated God's will is actually God's wish, but it doesn't happen.
Mm.
So,
Wow.
um, yeah, things like that that are very uh, that answer a lot of questions of where is God when we suffer. So that's what it's about. And uh, yeah, I'd love to come on again to answer your question there, Duke, and just share the whole story and some of the
It's
things that
kind it's
appear in
kind of
this
like me
chapter.
pointing a it's kind of like me pointing a gun to your head and asking like, "Hey, do you want to come back on my podcast?" It's, we're on my podcast right now, so I apologize for that. I don't like doing that to people, but sometimes it just happens.
I'm
But
fine. I'm
you can give
fine.
me your real answer off air after people aren't listening.
No, no, no. That's my real answer. I'd
But
be happy to do it.
yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you. No, but I do want to say thank you for writing that book. What you're talking about there, dealing with where is God in the midst of suffering, and that's a topic that every single man, woman, and child on this planet can relate
Yeah.
to in one way or another. Probably that every person has asked at one point or another, in one form or another. Why do
Yes.
bad things happen to good people? It's like probably the most one of the most common questions in existence. And I appreciate that journey that you went on and your obedience to the Holy Spirit to write it His way, and to take all that time to research and to really get into the background and the history, I guess, the meaning behind those words in Scripture. And that's just such it's such an important thing. It's such an important conversation. And yeah, I really look forward to kind of diving into that with you in a little bit more detail. um and yeah, yeah, so I appreciate you, Peter. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Again, I want to encourage everybody to check out the website, peterwarrenministries.com. And there you can find the book and find some other resources. I know there's some videos and a blog and some other stuff on that website as well. Right, Peter?
Yeah, not a whole lot, but yeah,
There's a
there
few.
is some, and yes.
Keep them guessing. We'll keep them guessing. No, but check it out. Check it out, because I know that it will bless you. If this conversation blessed anybody out there and added some value to your day, if you'd consider subscribing, sharing, or leaving a review, I'd really appreciate that. But before you do any of that, again, I do want to encourage you, check out peterwarrenministries.com. Take a look at that book. And I know that it's going to be impactful for your life. And maybe it seems to me like that would be a perfect gift for somebody, or a perfect book to share with somebody that's going through tragedy or that has gone through
Yes.
tragedy, and maybe they're asking those questions. So I just really want to encourage you guys to do that. Yeah. Well, Peter, any just final thoughts? We talked a little bit. We're kind of ran the gamut a little bit, which tends to happen on this show. Talking about your upbringing and stuff like that a little bit. Talking about YWAM and the purpose for YWAM, and raising up leaders, to go around the world and to share the love of Jesus Christ. We talked a little bit about the partnership of God's people with the heart of God, and we also talked about the adventure with Jesus and just the willingness to step out in faith and to follow Him even when it doesn't make sense to us. So we talked about a lot of things, but just any final thoughts that you have as we kind of wrap up here?
Yeah, I think um, Romans 12:21 says, "Don't be overcome by evil, but overcome
Yes.
evil with good."
Come
And
on.
we're in a day and age when there's a lot of animosity and contention and provocative language, and Jesus' way is not to come in the same spirit. Yeah, to turn the other cheek, go the extra mile. A soft answer, Solomon said, a soft answer turns away wrath. And there's a place to come in the opposite spirit that is God's way of fighting. It doesn't mean you let
Mm,
people walk all over you, and it doesn't mean you compromise or you don't speak the truth, but in spirit and attitude, to come to respond in that spirit of Jesus. I just take it a minute longer and kind of tell you
yeah,
this quick
absolutely.
story. So I was leading this YWAM outreach, actually in Mexico. We're in Monterrey, Mexico, and we were sleeping in Sunday school rooms, which is it becomes harder and harder each year, but
Mm.
on hard floors.
On the
We had
Yeah.
about 70 of us there, so a large
Wow,
group of young
that's
people.
awesome.
And there was one guy in the school. He was a married guy who had issues. Okay, there's always one at least who had some bigger issues, and we had this worship time, and I told everybody, listen, let's just go out and spend some time alone with the Lord. And then uh, I came to find out uh, he and a group of others were meeting when we'd sent them out to spend time alone with the Lord. And I went to the room, knocked on the door, and the door opened. And I said, "You guys were supposed to spend time alone with the Lord." And he just blew up at me. I mean, he just started
Mm,
yelling at me, and the veins were sticking out on the edge of his neck. He was a big bodybuilder kind of guy, and I'm not a
uh-huh.
I'm not a big guy, and and I just God gave me the ability to see him as a little boy rejected by his own father.
Wow.
And just in that moment, it was like a word of knowledge, a kind of a pictorial word of knowledge where I just saw this hurting kid, and I was the authority in his life at that point.
Wow.
And the Holy Spirit just came over me, and I walked over to him. I would not have done this in the natural, okay, but this was God trying to teach me this principle. I walked over and put my arms around him, and he just broke down and started weeping and weeping,
Mm,
and he went from anger to breaking because I didn't respond in the same spirit, but I came in that opposite spirit of love. And I just think if there's anything we need right now, especially in the world and in our nation, there's there's such a spirit that cannot be overcome in the same spirit. You can't win an
come on.
argument. I mean, you might be able
Yes.
to win an argument, but you're not going to win someone's soul. The way to come is in the spirit of Jesus, in that opposite
Hmm.
spirit of love, and that is the way to win it. That breaks it. And so I'd encourage everybody who's watching this or listening, in your situation, whoever it is that is stirring you up the wrong way, just pour out love upon them in word and deed, because that's the way to win the battle spiritually.
Man. And it's such a beautiful thing. It's such a beautiful thing when we have that opportunity. And I think that we so often miss out on those opportunities to really act the way that Jesus acted, to think like he thinks, and to treat people the way that he taught people here on the earth, where he stepped outside of what was, like, quote unquote acceptable for him to do as a man of God, and to come alongside people and to honor people that, were not considered to be honorable, or were not considered to be worthy of
Yes,
honor. And if all I ever do is honor and serve and show love to the people in my life that I get along with, then I'm not really doing anything, because that's easy. I don't even have to, if I just honor somebody because they're somebody that I like, how much am I actually
big
honoring
deal.
them, and how much am I just honoring myself because I see myself in them?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's just it's that. But I think we really get a chance to demonstrate who God is, and to realize who we are when we step, into a situation like that. And as you said, I love the way you say that, to move in the opposite spirit. Evil's not overcome by more evil. Evil is overcome by good. The
yes.
enemy is overwhelmed when you refuse to respond that way. One of my
He
favorite
doesn't know
verses
what to
is
do about it.
yeah, right? It's crazy. I love Ephesians chapter, excuse me, Philippians 1, I believe it's verse 28. And Paul says, not in any way terrified by your adversaries, which is to them proof of perdition, but to you of salvation, and that from God. It's proof to the enemy of his own perdition or his own judgment when you refuse to respond in fear to his attacks against you. And so
Yes,
often, these things that we do in anger, in frustration, the backbiting, like, fear is at the root of so many of these things that we do. And when you just refuse, as a child of God, when you remember who God is and who you are in Him, and that you don't have to just respond the way that everyone else is responding, or the way that you've typically responded in the past, but you can pause for a second and remember who you are, remember the authority that you carry, and say, no, I'm not going to respond in evilness. I'm not going to respond with that harsh answer. I'm not going to respond in fear. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stand for what's right, and I'm going to overcome evil with good. And as you said,
yeah,
it confuses the enemy, it terrifies him, and you don't have to fight him, because he flees from you. When you focus on
yes,
God in the midst of whatever it is that attack is, he flees. God, like, I don't know. I think God just runs him off. You don't have to do it on
Yes.
your own.
Yes.
So
It's powerful. And yeah, and it's more in the spirit and the attitude. Doesn't mean we
yes,
agree with
that's
what
right.
they're saying or doing, but in our spirit, it just disarms the enemy, the spirit behind it. Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, hey, great spending this time with you, Duke. I look forward to maybe meeting you in person at some point, Lord willing.
Yeah,
And yeah, just let me know when we can do this again. This sort of what we're just talking about uh, lines up with the way we responded to the shooting. Actually, the Lord showed us
mm,
to respond with forgiveness, which is not I think a number of people do that who've had violence against them. They've responded with forgiveness,
wow,
but some people were questioning, and I won't give the answer to what I'm sharing. I'll leave it for the next time. But people were going, but you can't. You Christians are always saying forgive, but where's the place of justice? Uh,
wow,
if you're always forgiving, then people will take advantage of you. And justice and forgiveness are not mutually exclusive. It's possible to do what is
that's
just
good.
and to forgive as well, because
That's good.
one is a role of authority. If you have the authority, you have to move with justice. But the others are personal. Personally, we always have to forgive, and I can kind of unpack that a little bit more
Mm.
if you'd like next time.
Oh man, please. I can't wait. I can't wait. No, again, I think that that's such a powerful conversation because of the fact that it's not just a conversation about forgiveness, it's a conversation about forgiveness that comes out of something that was so tragic and painful, but that you all as a community got together and said, "No, this is how we're going to respond. We're not going to respond to evil
Yes,
with more evil because ultimately that's not going to change anything. That's not going to help us be more free. It's not going to help us walk in healing, and it's just not the way that God would respond to this situation. But we're going to overcome evil with good, and yeah, that's
yes.
such a good word. So I appreciate that. Um,
Okay.
well, yeah, well, we'll set it up. We'll let everybody know when it's happening. I'm looking forward to that. Peter, I really did enjoy meeting you. It's a pleasure to know you, and thanks again so much for being on the show.
Bless you, Duke.
All right, bye everybody. See you.